the subject is not dominating anymore, but the inner ratio of the object, which again needs the subject to be formed. Since our subjectivity is a product and an agent of the present situation and its ideology, the bliss of the experience of art, either by producing art or by encountering it, demands breaking up the conventional subject and the reified relations of the subject with the inner and outer world. 3 more pages. One aspect that is always discussed in the context of Adorno's aesthetic theory is the problem of accessibility and elitism. Both categories basically aim at the fact that this theory rejects anything light, popular, commercial, easily understandable, applicable in art, that it highlights difficult, complicated, hermetic, rather inaccessible, problematic, supposedly negative art. Basically, the aesthetic theory is nothing but an attempt to understand Webern, Kafka, Beckett, Celan, Luigi Nono, Roscoe, and others, but from the point of view of the subject and the possibility of experience, anything that simply leaves us as we are and affirms how we see the world and ourselves betrays what art can be. It is for the sake of what subjects could be, what an experience that deserves the name as experience of alterity could be like. It is for the sake of being able to take the chance of getting rid of oneself. It is for the sake of encountering the other in form of an artwork that is freed from any instrumental use, and may it be self-expression. One more quote. With human means, art wants to realize the language of what is not human. The pure expression of artworks, freed from everything like interference, even from everything so-called natural, converges with nature, just as in Webern's most authentic works, the pure tone to which they are reduced by the strength of subjective sensibility reverses dialectically into a natural sound, that of an eloquent nature. Certainly, its language, not the portrayal of a part of nature. The total subjective elaboration of art as a non-conceptual language is the only figure at the contemporary stage of rationality in which something like the language of divine creation is reflected, qualified by the paradox that what is reflected is blocked. That was the quote. Instead of being elitist, aesthetic theory remains true to what a strong, sensible subjectivity could be like, and does not want to affirm the damaged selves that people in the administered world necessarily and sadly become. The more enigmatic and difficult artworks are, then the more they may hold in stock for future readings and interpretations. Again a quote. In recent aesthetic debates, especially in the fine arts, the concept of écriture has become relevant, inspired probably by Klee's drawings, which approximate scrawled writing. Like a searchlight, this category of modern art illumines the art of the past. All artworks are writing, not just those that are obviously such. They are hieroglyphs for which the code has been lost, a loss that plays into their content. Artworks are language only as writing. If no artwork is ever a judgment, each artwork contains elements derived from judgment and bears an aspect of being correct and incorrect, true and false. Yet the silent and determinate answer of artworks does not reveal itself to interpretation with a single stroke as a new immediacy, but only by way of all mediations, those of the work's discipline as well as those of thought and philosophy. The enigmaticalness outlives the interpretation that arrives at the answer. Another eternal point of criticism is the question of action. When Adorno died 40 years ago, after hiking in the mountains, which he had been asked not to do because of his weak heart, he had been heavily attacked by his own students he had strongly influenced and who became active in the student movement and student rebellion he sympathized with, because they claimed that all his theory lacked a concrete recipe and call for action. But for critical theory, the whole concept of action, which its Pavlov-like stimulation and reaction pattern, is part of the ideology of instrumentality and domination that has got us here in the first place. Action will simply reify the activists as they are, and thus drive away what they are longing for and aiming at. To encounter the other, to experience alterity, would demand more of a suspension of conventional action. Another aspect of this issue is the misunderstanding of thinking and contemplation, studying texts and interpreting them as something not active. Actually, to displace the structures of conventional thinking by studying complicated philosophical texts in itself is already hard work and goes beyond the vicious instrumental circle of learning and then applying. Adorno's whole notion of happiness, besides having a distinct relation to physical, erotic, corporeal experience, which are never considered inferior only because they are ephemeral, is not the idea of wild activity and self-fulfillment or self-expression, but rather a peaceful letting go of things, a more humble and observing and floating among the things that will offer us much more once we don't want to use them anymore for any purpose. Finally, and you may actually have thought of this as well while listening to me, Adorno's philosophy, including his aesthetic theory, is often labeled as being too negative. Negativity is indeed one of his terms, simply a category that comes from dialectics, but also in a certain way characteristic of the temperament of his approach to present reality. But the degree to which he speaks of alienation and reification, of betrayal and domination, besides being simply a true description of political and social realities and experiences people had to endure not only in his lifetime, has to do with the inherent longing for liberation and reconciliation, for which there are models in his personal and intellectual experience, one of them, the crucial one, being the experience of art. In the descriptions and interpretations of art, you can find not only in the aesthetic theory, you will discover a passion, a beauty of language, a sensitivity of thought that comes from a deep affection, a desire, and an ability for happiness. Quote, "But because for art, utopia, the yet to exist, is draped in black, it remains in all its mediations recollection of the possible in opposition to the actual that suppresses it. It is the imaginary reparation of the catastrophe of world history. It is freedom which under the spell of necessity may not ever come to pass. Aesthetic experience is that of something that spirit may find neither in the world nor in itself. It is possibility promised by its impossibility. Art is the ever-broken promise of happiness." in order to step out of the suffocating realm of the given and to actually prepare oneself for the encounter with the other, one must know that this other will not appear without a dislocation